Hello everyone. Some time ago I made a video looking at the beginnings of a project to recreate an XM16E1 from Airsoft components without recourse to buying a very expensive but very good gas blowback example. I wanted something that would be good enough for my purposes for display and reenacting, so using the basis of an electric airsoft gun rather than gas blowback. There is a very good XM16E1 replica out there in airsoft gas blowback form, but they're very expensive, and I don't have that sort of disposable income for something which is of limited use. It's primarily linked to my interest in Australian involvement in Vietnam, and Australian troops did make extensive use of the XM16E1 in the early to mid years of the war before the M15A1 was introduced and standardized. So the same is true for US troops. For the early through middle years of US combat troops' involvement in Vietnam, the XM16E1 was the M16 issued to the Army in Vietnam. It had various features which the Army had requested, notably the forward assist, but it had not yet had all the features which would be seen on the M16A1 introduced. And it's only in the middle years of the war that the M16A1 arrives on the scene. So hence the need for producing something which could be a stand-in for an XM16E1. And that's what we're going to have a look at here. We'll talk about the various features, what I've done to this to modify it, and where the various components I've used have come from. So that's what we're going to have a look at now. So here we have an overall look at the rifle, and I'm pretty pleased with how this has come out. It's not perfect by any means, but it's not a bad stand-in as they go. This is made up of various different components, but essentially it's an electric airsoft gun. And in theory, there's nothing which would prevent this from functioning other than the fact the motor is not fitted into the pistol grip to give more of a look of a proper M16 pistol grip. And they're of course hollow, so I've removed the motor and the base plate from there. If that was restored, which it easily could be, if not with this particular grip, I've modified the grip slightly, but with another grip which are easy to get hold of, this should in theory function. So you could, in theory, make a functioning electric airsoft gun, as I've, from the components so forth I've used here. Say for my purposes, this is purely for display and use in reenacting and displays and kit recreations and so forth. And as I say, it's a cheaper option than buying gas blowback, which is by far and away the most accurate way of representing an XM16E1, but a bit out of my price range. So we'll bring the camera a little bit closer and have a look at this in a bit of detail and talk about where the various components have come from. So we've got this zoomed in on the receiver here, but we'll actually start with the buttstock and move forward. No one that I've seen makes an electric airsoft gun compatible Type D, I think it is, buttstock, which is the type used on the M16A1. It is used on the early M16A1 and the XM16E1. So this is the buttstock you'd see, or recreation of the buttstock you'd see on the XM16E1 and the Vietnam era M16A1 really. The later trapdoor butt with the fixed sling swivel is a later design. Certainly I've never seen a photograph of one in use in Vietnam. I think it's more of a mid-70s thing, perhaps around the time of the fall of Saigon. I don't know exactly when that buttstock had come into use, but certainly for the majority of US and Australian involvement in Vietnam, it's not suitable. So even for an M16A1, which wouldn't need as much modification and so forth as we see here, still you'd be looking to modify the buttstock, and that's exactly what I've done here. This is a CYMA, or CYMA, I'm not sure how that's pronounced, CYMA buttstock. This is one of the best you're going to find. This actually comes with, the way these tend to work is they have a fixed sling swivel which is fitted here, in which I've filled the slot for that with some black milliput. And that would originally, well, most electric airsoft guns would have a fixed sling swivel. On the CYMA or CYMA buttstocks, it actually has a swiveling sling swivel sort of fitted in there, not properly in a hole drilled through the buttstock as we have here, but something that approximates this, but it's set too far back, and that's quite a noticeable difference. So some people might be happy with that. I wanted to modify this further. One thing it does have, which is nice, is the correct sort of profile of butt plate, which you can see here with a single screw at the top. That's quite nicely recreated. So what I've done is I've filled that slot where there's sort of a hidden screw behind the butt plate, which secures a mock-up of this sling swivel here on the CYMA buttstocks. What I've done is I've drilled it and then pinned it's an original pivot for the sling swivel. I've actually used the CYMA or CYMA sling swivel itself on that original pivot, because the sling swivel that came with it was really quite nasty the plastic coating and everything was completely shot. So this is actually a better representation for a clean, sort of usable example. The buttstock also, the SEMA or CYMA examples have a weird way of attaching them in. You screw a piece onto the back of the rifle inside, and then you use a shorter screw down to that. This uses the classic Army long screw, which screws straight into the back of the receiver. And that is, we'll talk about the classic Army components of this in a minute, but that screw that's used to secure the buttstock is from the classic Army rifle that this is based on. Moving forward, we'll talk about the receiver and the various components attached to it. The receiver, the most important element of the receiver for the XM16E1 is the partial fence, which we have here. Obviously on the M16A1, this would be extended around the magazine release. This is a boss for the retainer, the captive pin on the little detent, sorry, for the captive pin, the takedown pin at the front here. And there's a spring in there and a little detent that prevents that pin from being removed unless you depress it. So that's what this sort of boss along here is for. It's referred to sort of in collector's terms as a partial fence, and the M16A1 would introduce an extension to this around the magazine release. So that's an important feature of the XM16E1 for this early war period, early mid-war period, before the M16A1 is introduced. This is what you would see on the lower receiver, and it's quite a distinctive feature. The lower receiver is from a classic Army M15A1, and they modelled this really well. Some who've tried to sort of replicate this, the fence comes right to the end here, which is incorrect. It should fit stop halfway in a centre line along the magazine release button here, which is exactly what we've got. Really nicely recreated. I masked off, I've resprayed this, I masked off all the pins here that I wasn't going to remove. This had a tick in it, which this is the right-hand side, or would later be the right-hand side, fire selector indicator. So you'd have on the classic Army replica, the classic Army airsoft gun, you had safe, fire and auto here on this side, which is a later feature not present on the XM16E1. So I filled the little tick in this, which would indicate where the fire selector was, or what setting the fire selector was on. Filled that in, and obviously that's just been sprayed over when I've resprayed this. The magazine release was removed for spraying and refitted, and I've actually used some black Milliput to just fill the little Torx screw in the centre there. So that just gives something a little bit closer to the proper magazine release button. If I need to take it out, I can just dig that black Milliput off. It'll just come off, pop off with a knife and scrape out, and it'll be easy enough to remove that screw if need be. But that's just a small visual change. The pins are nice as well. They're quite close to original profile, and they function in the same way. They are both captive by a little detent. The rear one in this little section here, and as mentioned, the front one, the detent, is sort of housed in the fence there. The upper receiver is CYMA, and the reason I swapped this is the classic Army forward assist, which we have here, the representation of the forward assist. Of course, it doesn't do anything, it's just represented here on the side, is a lot shorter, and the CYMA or CYMA upper receiver replicated this feature a lot better, in my opinion. It looked a lot nicer, and as I say, that's the reason for swapping these out primarily. I masked off the dial for the rear sight and removed the cocking handle when I did the respray, and just masked off this as well. But the masking job seems to have worked quite well. Masking the pins was done with a little blob of PVA glue, which you could then just flick off with a knife once the paint had dried. I went for a grey, sort of a mid-grey, which is supposed to replicate the mid, even light grey finish you see on early M16s, which I really wanted to replicate with this. It's quite common to see in photographs in Vietnam through the middle years of the war, and as I say, I wanted to recreate that. Originally, I'd left the dust cover black, or sprayed it black, and that really looked very stark, so I've sprayed it to basically match the rest of the receiver, which is not uncommon to see, basically in the same finish. But you do see components in different finishes, so having a cocking handle and the sight, the dial on the sight here, and the forward assist in a darker colour is not uncommon as well. The magazine was also resprayed. I think we did talk about this in part one. I've modified this, I've taken out the innards, so it's just for display, this one. I've sprayed it a light grey, slightly bluer tint of light grey to give that sort of early aluminium magazine finish, a little bit lighter than the receiver, and I've put a proper base plate on there, so that's just for display. This would still quite happily take a functioning Airsoft magazine, but that's, obviously, for display purposes, that's a better sort of thing, rather than having the little toothed wheel in the bottom and so forth. Also masked off the trigger. I didn't actually remove any of the innards of this. I just masked it all off because I didn't want to be driving out these little pins and things, but that's worked perfectly well. We're nearly finished with the receiver. We'll turn this over in a minute and have a look at the details on the other side. Talking about the pistol grip now, while we've got this here, as you can see, the pistol grip would normally have a motor in it, of course, but I've removed the motor, and there would be a notch at the front here for where the base plate fitted in. This is completely incorrect for the M16. The M16 has a hollow pistol grip, and of course on gas blowback guns, that's what you would have. You'd have a hollow pistol grip basically compatible with real steel. For this, I've removed the motor and modified this particular pistol grip. You can see we still have the screw hole at the back there and this plastic boss in here to take the rear screw for the base plate. I will probably at some point get a tool in there and remove some of that plastic, and probably, don't know if you'll be able to see in there, the lighting, but down in here you've got the hole for the drive for the motor, and the screws are visible attaching the pistol grip, and I'll probably put a black plastic card plug in there, maybe just with a bit of blue tack or something to hold it in, that can easily be pried out, but which covers up that hole and so forth in there, just to improve the look when it's propped up and so forth. But this is certainly an improvement. When it's at this sort of angle, it looks a lot better than having the base plate in there, which is completely inaccurate, of course, but necessary if you wanted to use this as a working electric airsoft gun. That's the one modification to this, which means it doesn't function, but you could easily swap a pistol grip with the base plate in place and the motor and so forth if you wanted to, sort of swap and change as needed. I'll turn this over now and we'll have a look at the other side of the receiver. Not much has changed here. As I say, you can just see the markings. I decided not to remove any of the markings from this side. They're now very, very faint. You just see them there, perhaps. They're completely spurious, but they're faint enough that it doesn't really make much odds. So I decided not to go to the efforts I'd gone to on the other side in removing the various markings. I think in part one I'd already started to do that. So if you go back to that video, you'll see the scuff marks and so forth on the other side, where I'd used a little Dremel tool, a little Dremel sanding wheel to remove those, and they're not very deeply etched, so it was really easy to remove them to get a nice smooth finish on this side, because on the XM16E1 you shouldn't have any markings on this side of the receiver. As I say, I left them on this side because with the paint they're now pretty faint and they just give an impression of something there. So for my purposes that's perfectly fine. Was quite happy with that. Again, Cyma upper receiver mates quite happily with the Classic Army lower receiver there. I had to do a little bit of filing on the hole at the front here for the takedown pin to go through. Other than that, absolutely fine. So that was nice and easy in that regard. Moving on to talk about the barrel and the handguards here. Just maneuver this around a little bit so we can see. So the barrel and the front sight, I believe, are from the Classic Army rifle, if I remember correctly. I'm trying to think of where all the pieces came from now. The magazine is Cyma. I should have mentioned that. That's a Cyma magazine in there. The barrel retention nut here, and obviously this is also the spring catch for the handguards. This is a Cyma component, but the barrel itself is Classic Army. It's quite a nice profile in that regard. It flares out slightly at the end here, like a proper XM16E1 or M15A1 barrel would. Of course, it's a thinner barrel than we'll be seeing on the M16A2. And again, the profile of the foresight and the gas block there is quite nice as well. The three-prong flash hider is one I picked up online, I think, if I remember correctly. This might be a Cyma example as well, or I think I may have used no, I think this is the Cyma example, and this would normally be retained with a grub screw, and I'm just trying to find it now. I filled in, there it is. You just see it on this side. I filled in the grub screw hole because I don't need it, so that might just want a little bit of rubbing down, but again, that's some black milliput there. And it has an extra section at the back which gives the impression of a crush washer, a split washer, a spring washer, which is what would have been fitted, but that's not real. That's part of the muzzle device, but it looks good. It gives the right sort of profile at the front here. The profiling up of the barrel is not perfect, but it's not bad by any means. It's probably the best you're going to find on an electric airsoft gun, or something based on an electric airsoft gun. So a bit of a compromise as this all is, but it doesn't look too bad. Quite happy with it. And the final thing which I changed is the grips, because the Classic Army grips are not very good. So this uses a Cyma retainer at the front here, and these are, if I remember correctly, E&C grips, which, as you can see, have the heat shield inside. Now, this heat shield isn't perfect. It's not an exact recreation of those you'd find in real front grips, but it gives the impression, you can see it there, the aluminium, the shine of that, which obviously the original grips do have. And the Classic Army and the Cyma front, the handguards or grips, don't have a heat shield in them. So it's a slight upgrade in that regard. And these weren't expensive, very cheap to pick up online and ship over. I think I actually bought them in Hong Kong, along with the spare, along with the buttstock. So, as I say, overall pretty pleased with this. I realise I've forgotten to mention one thing when talking about the receiver, so we'll come back to that now. I knew I'd forget something as we were going along, and I actually mentioned painting this, but I didn't talk about the details of it. One of the biggest problems with, or quite apart from all the other problems we've talked about here that I've had to sort of, you know, make a Frankenstein to get around the various detail issues that different manufacturers have with trying to recreate something that looks like an XM16E1. And considering how many manufacturers recreate the M15A1, none of them produce a good looking dust cover. They all produce the M16A2 dust cover, which has a much bigger sort of boss on the front here for the latch. The M16A1 and indeed the XM16E1 use the dust cover as much as we see it here, with a small oblong at the top, which is the sort of the boss for the retainer. And I've replicated that by removing the A2 style boss from the outside of the dust cover, filling the hole, which shows up a little bit, but it's not too bad. Taking a piece of plastic card, cutting it to the right sort of size for the little oblong at the top there, and gluing it in place, basically. It still functions, as you can see. So it still functions perfectly well, and would do on a functioning electric airsoft gun. You can no longer remove this. This is now sort of glued in place. It would originally have been screwed. It's now glued in place, but it still works. There's a little spring and little latch in there. And I've just filled the screw hole. You can see the back of the fill on that there. Generally, I wouldn't have this with the dust cover open because it gives away this latch is wrong, and also you've only got a mock bolt carrier in there, which is sitting a slightly odd angle at the minute, but it does work. It would in theory work anyway. One final thing I did do is, this is a Cyma faux bolt carrier, which was originally in a black finish to give sort of the look of a Parkerized bolt carrier. Of course, on the XM16E1, certainly on early examples, you would have had a chrome bolt carrier. So took all the paintwork off that and took it back to bare aluminium to give the impression of a chrome bolt carrier. So if you do see this with the dust cover open, at least it gives the impression of a chrome bolt carrier. So close the dust cover up there. As you can see, that does function perfectly well. And that's basically it, I think. I've covered everything there. As I say, the biggest things is a Classic Army upper married with a Cyma, Classic Army lower receiver married with a Cyma upper. It's a Classic Army barrel with E&C grips, the Cyma barrel nut there, and then we have a modified Cyma buttstock, which has that nice D-type butt plate, and then it's been modified with an original sling swivel here, but with the Airsoft sling swivel, the Airsoft sling loop fitted to it. There's a little bit of black milliput there I've just found on that, so I've just removed that there, but pinned in place through this. When drilling, it's very soft plastic, so that was actually quite tricky to do without sort of tearing up the plastic, because it is very soft, but it did work. But yeah, that's everything covered there. I'm just double checking I've not missed anything. But as I say, it's basically a hybrid primarily between Cyma and Classic Army components. Of course, the Classic Army M15A1 has been out of production for quite a while. If anyone has one and they're looking to sell it, please do let me know, because I'd be interested in picking up another lower receiver with this partial fence for future projects. They are quite useful for converting. Even if it's completely broken, it would be fine for my purposes. It would work very well. So please do let me know if you have one with this style of lower receiver. Might be interested in purchasing it second-hand for further modifications and further recreations of early M16s. So there it is. That's a look over the various features I've changed on this rifle. So we'll have another quick look at the overview of this here. As I say, I'm pretty pleased with it. I think the overall look is pretty good on balance, and I'm pleased with how it's all come out, and obviously the work I've put into it, how it's ended up looking. It's certainly suitable for my purposes going forward, and it'll show up both in recreations of Australian kit in Vietnam, from obviously Australian involvement in Vietnam, and also on the secondary channel, looking at US kit as well. So that's just another quick look at the rifle as a whole here, having looked at some of the details. So there it is, a very delayed part 2 to the original part 1 looking at this project. Hopefully it's been interesting looking at this. As I say, it's more cost effective for me anyway, method of coming up with something which is a fairly good stand-in for an XM16E1 for display and reenacting events and so forth. So useful for me, possibly not to everyone's taste. It's not perfect by any means, but it's a pretty good stand-in from my perspective, and I'm very happy with it, and it's been fun working on it. Got to the point here where I was happy to talk about this in the video and what I've done and so forth, and hopefully it was of interest. If you have found this interesting and you'd like to see more of this sort of thing, please do consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. And whether you're newly subscribing or you've previously subscribed, please do make sure you hit the little bell, the notification button down below. That will of course alert you when I upload future videos. If you really like my uploads and you'd like to support the channel, you can. Both Patreon and PayPal are linked down below. And as I always say, a huge thank you to everybody who supports the channel using those two methods. It really is greatly appreciated. Thank you all very much indeed. If you'd like to follow the channel on social media, Facebook, Instagram and Twitter are all linked down below. And if you'd like to get in touch with me but you don't really use social media, there is of course an email address down there as well. That's everything for this video. So until next time, bye for now.